Okie dokie. How's everybody doing? Can you hear me all right? Thumbs up? Good. All right. Interesting topic tonight. So, we'll probably have a bunch of new people on tonight 'cause just started a new course this week. So, welcome them for people in Environmental Management Tool 660. And tonight, what I want to talk about is sustainability reporting, but not sustainability reporting just in general, but specific to what's going on right now. So I've entitled this podcast Sustainability Reporting in Disruptive Times, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Okay? And this relates to a lot of different things that I'm looking at with all of you who are taking different courses, some of which are just generic sustainable development issues. Some are related to financial reporting, like environmental accounting. Some are related to the use of environmental management tools as well. And then just the general person has got to start to think that, we need to build resilient organizations in light of the disruption that's going on right now, and that's beneficial for everybody at the end of the day. Okay, first and foremost, I guess the question I start with is, what does an organization, why does an organization do a sustainability report? Why do you think they do it right off the bat? What do you think? Anybody? Stakeholder relations, that's one. Yeah. Anything else? Meet regulations, sure. Sometimes it's regulatory. There's a lot of different reasons. So to get funding sometimes, sure, could be stewardship, yeah. Reputation's big, staying competitive, cost analysis, a lot of different reasons. There's no one reason why. What about shameful promotion? What about that? What about fooling people? Greenwashing, yes, of course. Let's be real. Of course, it's definitely part of the game. So we need to be aware of that because we're pros, right? So our job, and in fact, you may have the job at some point of criticizing or critiquing CSR reports or sustainability reports. I've done that before. I've looked at competitive analysis and assessed what was good and what wasn't for a company, for an energy company. Okay, cost benefit for sure. So why do they do it? A lot of different reasons. Someone's got their audio on there. And sometimes it's to fool people. Sometimes, for sure, but often not, though. Like, I would say that the situations in which a organization is doing cost benefit, doing a sustainability report, it's less often, at least today, for sure, to fool people. I guess someone's got their audio on. I don't know who it is. Make sure you're muted, whomever, everybody, if you don't mind. So there's a lot of different reasons people do it, and we need to figure out why. However, in this day and age, it's becoming the norm. So you're seeing more companies than not that are starting to publish this, and it wasn't always the case. So I guess the next question is, there's a lot of different reasons why a group would do it, but who's it for? So who is a sustainability report for? Like, what's their audience? So who do they do it for? We've already said there's stakeholder relations. So it could be, part of it is marketing. So your customer base is part of that. It depends on the organization, so like we've talked about Puma in 560. So Puma does it because, well, a lot of reasons, but they're customer facing. So they have people that buy their stuff, right? They go to the store and they buy shoes and shirts and whatever. So part of their plan is marketing. Like they want to market their brand as being sustainable. Same with Nike and Adidas and other companies like that. Whereas, other companies like energy companies, for instance, that's not as important because, if you're an upstream producer of oil and gas, I mean, you don't have someone coming to your plant and buying your product usually, like it's usually sold off and then there's, end deliverers as stations. Like, you do have Shell stations and Esso and so forth, but often there's a difference between who's doing the extraction, delivery, refining, and then actual giving that or selling that to a client. So for them, it could be different. So the audience can be consumers, it can be regulators, it can be investors, it can be your own staff. So it can be your own internal team of people, like especially if you're a to culminate and demonstrate to the people that work for that company that you actually care about this stuff. And that's actually a very strong motivating factor for a lot of people. They want to work for responsible companies. So the sustainability report is a means by which you can integrate that together. And so there are different audiences, and then just general public, civil society. So what is it? What exactly is a sustainability report, and what do you put in it, and where does it come from? Okay, so what are the three things that you'd say contribute to a sustainability report? Three types of stuff. I would say one is obvious. Think about environmental parameters. That's one thing. Second parameter, there we go. Economic, social, and environmental. But in adding to that, you add governance. Social, yeah, but governance is now, and I'll talk about this in a bit, but it wasn't as much of an issue as it is now. So typically you're going to, yes, your economic, social, and environmental indicators, but you're also going to get governance indicators as well. So that's why often now you'll see it's called an ESG report, environmental, social, and governance report. Okay, and they do that a lot of those kind of metrics for investors. When you're looking at the ranking companies for sustainability, they'll look at their ESG reports. So how does this come about though? Like, what is the evolution of a sustainability report? So when was the first time you saw a sustainability report or heard about it? Some people might say tonight, but do you recall what year you first saw a company doing a sustainability report? Anybody? 2019, yeah. Anybody else? Go 2020, okay. 2012, yeah. 2012 would be progressive. 2012 would be a company that's like, okay, well, we need to be ahead of the curve for a sustainability report, okay? So this is the time arc we're talking about. So this is the evolution roughly of how these things have materialized. So in the 1960s and 1970s, so quite a while ago now, that's when really like environmental concerns in the mainstream came into kind of public discourse. So 1960s with Silent Spring and Rachel Carson's book, and social uprising in the 60s and so forth, and people became more aware about the environment. And it went into the 1970s that we started to see actual legislation that was focused on the environment. So environmental impact assessment, the necessity for doing an EIA for projects was in the 70s when it first started, right? And really that was kind of the first stage of environmental management, or which led into sustainability reporting. So in the 70s is started the EIA process and legislation. The 1980s and when you started to see the emergence of key indicators. So in the 80s you started to see, okay, well, companies, organizations started to report on energy use and waste production and these kind of like very, very core things for the environment, right? And those would be companies that were actually quite ahead of the curve at the time, like the Xeroxes and so forth. And in the 1990s, we started to see more data being produced, largely because in the 1990s, that's when technology started to catch up, right? So we had more data and more reporting in the 90s because guess what happened in the 1990s? People started to use computers more prevalent. Computers started to kind of pervade business information systems and so forth, started to become common, right? And then with that, the access and management of data became better, and also the legislation was in place. So systems thinking became more prevalent in that era, as was the technology to support it in the IT revolution. It wasn't really into the 2000s in which we started to see the emergence of what was called CSR, corporate social responsibility. Okay, that's when companies, and that would be what I would say was the first sustainability reports, was getting into the 2000s or later, and they would call them at that time CSR reports. Okay, you'd say, what's the CSR report for a bank, right? And even at that time, in the between 2000 and 2010, I was started doing this stuff, and I noticed that a lot of the reports to communicate what a company was doing for their customers, like a bank or whomever. Okay, and it wasn't into the 2010, and this is Karen's comment about 2012-ish. That's when sustainability reports really started to kind of become a thing in 2010 to 2019. So this is where CSR. In fact, CSR became a bad word in the late 2010s, like not 2010s, but in around 2008-9, you didn't want to say CSR because people are like, oh, CSR, that's just like boilerplate crap, like that's just, you just take the report at the shelf and change the data and that's it. They're just doing that to do it. Whereas sustainability reporting, as it came into the 2010 to 2019, the sophistication people, more attention to different things in different sectors having more pressure put on them. So mining, for instance, forestry, energy, each of which said, look, we need to do this, but our needs are so unique. The things that we deal with are so unique to our sector that they started to develop specific standards for industries. So like, the Canadian Mining Association started to develop their own kind of standards, really, which their own specific metrics. And this speaks to also certification standards like the Forest Stewardship Council or eco-certified stuff or organic certifications. So all of those things started to really kind of become far more sophisticated post 2010. Okay, and then with that, even those substandards started to materialize. So for instance, you had the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, before 2010. It did exist. However, it wasn't until after that that these substandards that some of you are looking at in your courses started to emerge. So like, for instance, doing the specific GRI substandard for biodiversity. What do you need to report on for biodiversity in order to become a GRI certified organization, right? So that's when things started to get a little more sophisticated, right, up until this past year. However, I think we're in a new era now, come 2020. And what do you think makes me think that? Why do you think we're in a new era? What's happened so far in 2020? Post-COVID reckoning, yes. It's not just COVID, but yeah, that's the big one. What has COVID shown us? COVID has disrupted everything. Okay? COVID has shown us we aren't resilient in a lot of our systems. Exactly. We are not. We are really not resilient. We aren't prepared. Exactly. We are not ready. Okay? And we've been hit once by something significant that's global in nature. SARS was whatever. I mean, it was a pandemic, but this is a global pandemic, a global phenomenon. And there are other things, lack of self-sufficiency, yes, Look at psychologically, are we prepared as individuals to this? I don't know. I've never had to been cooped up for months on end. It's weird. So this is what I think, and I probably should write a paper on this or something, but we're actually in this era that we've talked about for a while. And this is the era of disruption. So we've heard about disruption in the past couple of years, technologically speaking, right? So anybody that's in tech has been to any conference, if it was like gaming through to IoT, through, I don't know, social media, disruptive technology, right? Disruptive technology is changing everything, how we work. And like, this is not disruptive technology. This is the world disrupting what we're doing in a huge way. And very destructively in some cases. It's killing people, right? So we are in what I would say is an era of disruption in terms of sustainability reporting, environmental management, and this kind of thinking. Now, the thing is, though, this is not new. We've actually been talking about this for at least the past 15 years, right? So this is not a subject that someone said, oh, well, I mean, why didn't we think about this? Like, this has been something that has been talked about for at least 15 years, probably more, but in detail in 15 years. And in some cases, it's pockets of scientists and in the resilience community for sure. And it's not just about pandemics necessarily. The whole idea of disruption and how that affects how we do what we are doing and how we're existing as societies and economies. It's not limited to pandemics, but it's the fact that the Earth system is under stress, right? Like, our life support systems are under stress. The things that we rely on to function. COVID is an example of, a signal that has shown, we're vulnerable. But there's other things as well, right? And so the planetary boundaries model, which most of you are familiar with, if not everybody, does a very good job of communicating that. And that, again, is not new. So the first paper on the planetary boundaries was published, I think, in 2011, if not 29. At the very latest, it was 2011. I think it was 2009 or 2011. So it's been around for a good 10 years, that idea of planetary boundaries, which is basically, for those that aren't familiar with it, and I'll include that in the notes, is safe operating space for our society. Like, given what we need and what we do on this planet as a species, this is our safe operating space. We're impacting this kind of thing. Usually it's a part of the Earth system function. So, for instance, climate regulation, the amount of biodiversity, nutrients, et cetera. We have space where the carrying capacity of the Earth is okay. We're not disrupting, destabilize, right? Whereas that really talks about what are those different components of our life support systems and how are we doing in terms of our impact on them. Some are okay even then, but some were even, when it first published, was not so good, and like kind of the orange caution sign, and some were even in the red, like we're in deep trouble sign 10 years ago. So the one 10 years ago was biodiversity. Like, biodiversity and the loss of biodiversity and degradation of ecosystems is in a critical phase right now. We are threatening, or we are faced with the potential of destroying many species to extinction, and we need biodiversity. So, but the thing about the planetary boundary model that is good is that it shows us where we sit and what's going on, like how are we doing roughly in each one of these. But what doesn't show us? What doesn't the planetary boundary model show us? What's the thing it doesn't really give us a clue about? What do you think? Solutions, yes, but even before the solution. Solution to what? Yes, how to stay with, okay, good. But then also what it doesn't show us. I mean, they do talk about that, and there's been a lot of that kind of talk, but sometimes we just go out of those boundaries. This is one of the things I was thinking about today when preparing this. Is that, well, this is great. We know what the framework is. We know where we're at. But what if we go to the boundaries? Like, what happens then? And what it doesn't show is what happens when we get out of the safe space, how it will impact us. Like, planetary boundaries does not show how we deal with, a global pandemic when we've impacted biodiversity to the point at which novel viruses become a common day occurrence, right? Doesn't show us that. I'm not saying they should have, but it's not what it was designed for. And where we are at is getting to that point in a lot of those different divisions, right? And so people say is what we coined this term is a new era that we are clearly in, I think now, which is called the Anthropocene, right? So what is the Anthropocene? Often because we haven't experienced beyond those boundaries, that's it. So the Anthropocene is like the Holocene, exactly. It's the age of human impact. So we have the Pleistocene, the Holocene, all these different kind of eras in geological time, each of which are characterized more or less based on one dominant force, right? Like, so what was a major dominant force that would kind of, be the key descriptor, the key thing why you'd have an era in geological time? Name one thing that would have happened that say, oh, this is it, right? Ice age, glaciation, right? Temperature drop, glaciation, everything freezes. That's okay, it was frozen for this many thousands of years, the Earth was, and that's the Ice Age, so that's this, we're going to call it that. So we're in something called the Anthropocene, which is era of human impact. It's the era in which human activity is the most dominant force on Earth. It is the most dominant shaping force in the Earth system, like to the point at which we shape how the Earth works. We don't adapt to how the Earth is working, we're actually shaping it. Right? Like COVID's actually a really good example. It's like, we've, to some degree, based on how we've kind of conduct our affairs, subjected ourselves to this viral infection, which is then kind of pushing back at us in a big way, and something we'll have to adapt to. So, I mean, this is the new era that we're in, that we have, our role is to then manage our affairs such that we can deal with these changes and control our impact on the Earth system. So this is where we come back to this whole idea then of sustainability reporting as a very, very important thing now in this disruptive era that I would argue that we are now entering into clearly now. In fact, you could mark this on the calendar as February 2020 is when we had 2 feet just thrown into the Anthropocene without question. Okay? So it's not all about the environment though. That's the other interesting thing that we're starting to see now as well. Like if we were just environmental science people, okay, well, we need to limit our greenhouse gas emissions, we need to stop deforestation and watch our impact on biodiversity, control nutrients, make sure invasive species are under control, control SOx and NOx emissions so we don't get acid rain, look at VOCs and persistent organic pollutants so we don't get carcinogens, endocrine disruptors, all environmental stuff. We get it under control, good, we're done, right? We're good, we're going to stay safe. No, it's not that. And this is sustainability reporting is not just about the environment, right? It is also about factoring in social issues, economic issues, and governance issues. So social disruption is now the new norm. Excuse me. Exactly. And if you look at the news today and what we are witnessing, I think it would be hard to refute that. So there's other factors that we have to deal with in this kind of new era of disruption, social disruption. So what are some things that are prevalent in this era of social disruption? What are some of these factors? Much like greenhouse gas emissions for climate, what could you say socially are things that are disruptive factors that we need to get a handle on? What would you say? Poverty, yes. altruism in a way. Racism, yes. Poverty, yes. What else? Elderly care, health, care of people, sure. Addictions, health, sure. Food scarcity, food insecurity, big time, big one. That's not even presenting itself right now, and it's going to. Like it's, we don't remember that we had famines before. Mental health, so human well-being, water issues, right? Some of those are like there's an obvious crossover between the environment and the social factors, but we have, what about gender? No one said gender. What about that? It's a disruptive factor. Gender in society, how we have dealt with it, which is not great. Intersectionality, another way to look at that. What is the way that we deal with gender and sexual orientation and so forth? Race, racism, economic equity, freedom, health issues, access to healthcare, freedom. What about freedom? We take freedom. Freedom's a value. So there's all these social factors that are contributing to this. So these are disruptive factors socially. So what does this have to do then with sustainability reporting? So organizations to some degree, religion, freedom of religion as well. What do we believe? Organizations to some degree then have personalities, right? We think of them in these terms, and responsibilities. Organizations do, not us as individuals, sure we do as individuals, but also groups do, organizations do, because they are things. They stand for something. And almost we perceive them as people in a way, right? Like you think of, I don't know, Royal Roads as something that stands for things because it is what it is. It's the ontology of it, why it exists. It's something that has characteristics. And in fact, some people argue, like if we want to look at a corporate context, we look at businesses have those personalities, right? So there was a book that was published a while back in the 90s, late 90s, called The Corporation. Do you ever remember that book that came out? It was from a UBC law professor. Joel Bakken wrote that book. Anybody remember that book or the film? Maybe not. Cindy, heard of it? Yeah, it goes back a bit, but for those that are in this area of work, it was huge then, because at that time, this was where corporate greed was at its like peak, and it got even worse, with after that, and I don't know if it's got any better since then, but it really came to a significant head. And this book is quite interesting. If you look at, there's the Amazon link to it, and they made it into a film. Here, that's the outline of the film. And the author, who's a law prof at UBC, I think he's still a law prof there, Joel Bakken, part of his argument in that book was that organizations can develop almost personality traits. And he called this the pathologic nature of some organizations or corporations, and that they can exemplify personalities. They almost assume personalities. And therefore his argument was that given the fact that they have this kind of tendency to do things, they also have responsibility, right? And can be prosecuted in some ways. This is coming from a legal standpoint. And I'm simplifying what he's saying, but the point of this is, what I'm trying to bring up here is that organizations have characteristics that we identify with and we perceive, right? And those characteristics are based on what those organizations do, like you and like people of, heads of state and so forth. You know of them for certain things they do or how they look or whatever, and how they present themselves and present their actions and their beliefs in society. So traits, organizations have traits. So what do you think when we think of different companies? So what do you think when you think of McDonald's, what do you think? The company McDonald's. What do you think about? False food. It's funny. Cheap, nasty food. That's what's stuck with it, right? But to give them a bit of credit, they've tried to kind of move in a different direction with their McCafe and so forth and added better quality things. Their coffee is actually pretty not so bad. But yeah, they are known for that. Corporate America. That's why, because McDonald's has been around for a long time, right? It takes a long time to switch someone's perception of something. So to go and start to think of McDonald's as a health organization would be a challenge, I would say, because you've got this ingrained identity for the past 30 plus years. Okay, cool. A documentary, that'd be great to see that. And there's that film about the start of McDonald's. So McDonald's has this personality, okay? There's Adidas. What do you think about Adidas? Activewear, sports. I think kind of funky because they've always had a bit of like a funk to them, and even the way they present their design stuff. Okay. Patagonia. Anybody know the Patagonia? Trying to launch this recycled plastic for sure. Patagonia. What do you think about Patagonia? 1% sustainable. Clearly. More unsustainable. Yes. Environmentalists love Patagonia. Why? Chouinard, founder, purist, expensive. Yeah, it's not cheap stuff. Not my favorite, frankly. I don't think I have anything from Patagonia. I prefer Arc'teryx over Patagonia. Just me though. Not super stylish, that's for sure. But but they have that identity, you see, and their identity has been created based on an ethos that they have. So we perceive of organizations. They promo fix, don't stitch, let my people surf. And yeah, I mean, they're authentic. That's one thing. That's a good word for Patagonia. Authentic. They're not lying. Like they're all in for the environment and sustainability. So we perceive of organizations based on how they act and how they present themselves, and then how society reacts to them. And this is how you've reacted to Patagonia. Pretty much collectively, everybody says, this is great. At McDonald's, how people react to McDonald's. It's cheap, fast food, represents corporate America. Fast, easy, focused on fast profitability even, not health necessarily. So the idea of brand then has really taken on a life of its own, but it's not just about products now. So it's not just the brand of the product like Nike sneakers or whatever. The brand has become so important to groups that it embodies the ethos of a company. So the ethos of Patagonia. So you didn't say anything about the product. So when people say, I'll say, oh, I like their backpacks. Oh, I like this. Some people said, oh, they're stylish, but it was more about what the ethos of the company is when you think about them, right? Like that's what you think about. And much like you didn't talk about Big Macs, you talked about what the perceived ethos is of the company. So what then do we want to see then from brands in terms of sustainability? We have to then delineate what do we expect to see? What would we hope to see? What are the characteristics? The staff. So what are things that we want to see then in terms of brands when it comes to sustainability? What are some characteristics that we would like to see out of those people? It's their people, their organizations. So circular materials, so circular economy embodied in what they do. Transparency. We're transparent about how we run our organization, right? What else? What are some other things that you'd expect to see in sustainability? Credibility, yes. Do we believe you? And that goes hand in hand with transparency. So third-party audits, that's an important part of maintaining credibility, right? What else? Trust and so community, openness, a commitment to community, transparency and openness, yes. So there's a lot of things that we know, like see right off the bat, we know, well, we want to see this. We expect a sustainability embodied brand should be these things. So these things that you have delineated are ethics. They're part of the ethos. So I have an ethical system. Here's 3 of the characteristics. I'll include them in the notes, the whole thing. Being caring, being honest, being responsible citizens, being environmentally friendly. These kind of things are characteristics we'd want to see in and reported on in a sustainability report. Unfortunately, we've got some good guidelines for that. So when we see this, though, when we see an organization, people first, and we reward organizations, right? Society rewards organizations um, by giving them social license to operate. And the social license to operate is becoming quite important. In fact, it's becoming almost a make and break type of thing because of the social disruption talking about. And some people say cancel culture, right? That would be like the Fox News version of this. They said, oh, cancel culture does this again. And I can see their point in some ways, but at the same time, cancel culture is happening for a reason. It's happening because people want to see certain ethics demonstrated by organizations, like being honest, transparent, open, putting people first, putting the environment first, right? And by they get rewarded. Good ethics are rewarded through social license, and social license and it is given based on the fact, and largely now I would argue, is sustainability reports are a very big part of that granting of social license. They are the means by which you capture the information and data that shows people what you are doing. Yeah, and that's the thing. This is why we need to make sure that there's proper transparency in place and proper standards. So we're getting there. I'm getting to the point. Does this change now through the era of disruption? Because we're in a new era. Do you think all of that stuff is going to change at all? Are we going to change that we want to give organizations social license or demand that? In light of, I don't think it'll change. I agree. It should become more important. Yes, I think it will, in fact, become more important because companies want to bring back consumers, and we've had to be like taps turned off for like good 3 months, right? And the tap will not turn on again for some groups. They're not going to exist anymore. That's the reality of it. So, and to bring customers back, to give them that social license again, especially when economic constraints are more prevalent, this is going to be important, right? So I don't think it will change dramatically. It may become more important, but it might change in some ways. Consumers will be more conscientious. I hope so. I hope that, and I think we should kind of not demand it, but certainly put it on people's radar. And I'm going to put this forward to you to think about tonight for the first time. Is me saying this is not only do we want to see the ethical traits, these organizations that we kind of like and we identify with and say, look, you're affordable, you're doing the right things, you're putting people first, et cetera, et cetera. But I think we also have a responsibility to demand resilience as well. Demand that these organizations are not only thinking about all these good things we need to do, but think about in the context of the fact that we're in a very disruptive era. Because if you're not resilient as an organization, then you may not exist, right? And that means your employees will not have jobs. There's widespread impacts of a lack of resilient thinking on the part of an organization right now. And when these companies are going out of business, some of them, that's a response. And so who loses? Well, I mean, of course the owners lose, but so do the employees, so do the stakeholders, so does the economic development that comes out from having these organizations vibrant and operating in communities. Even in energy companies and coal plants and so forth, we need to think that those are important things for communities. So because a good organization now, a durable organization, and an anti-fragile organization is one that can cope in these times. It's one that can endure what is thrown at it. So as consumers and investors, employees, and citizens, I would say it's almost incumbent on us to recognize the need for resilience in how organizations are run. I think it's that important based on what we're seeing. Yeah, as a characteristic. Okay, and that, I think we're going to have to see that being manifested in sustainability reports, saying, well, how are we resilient? And demonstrate to people how that is being thought about in that organization and monitored and managed. And for those in 660, we're going to get into this. So, in the era of disruption, to conclude, what are the good, the bad, and the ugly? Okay, the good. The good are organizations that foster the ethics that we want to see, like we've talked about, like the Patagonias. They can continue to function, right? They can still stay in business. That's an important part if it's a company or an organization, even if it's an NGO. They still need to continue to operate. I'm on a board of a volunteer member of a board of a charitable organization. They need to have finance in order to provide housing, food to people in the Caribbean. It's called Food for the Poor. If they don't have donations, it doesn't work, right? If there's no money, there's no party in a lot of these cases. Okay? The good organizations are they are predictive. They can predict or attempt to predict what's going on. They're agile. They can change. They are forward thinking. They're looking to see what's coming on and how they might adapt to that. So, because we're not at the end of the disruption, that's the thing. I think we're just entering into this era. There will be more food disruptions, climate disruptions, social disruptions. So we want to see how they can plan and adapt to these potential disruptions. It's an important part. That's the good. So these are the companies like the Patagonias, I would say, are one of them. I'd say IKEA is one of them. IKEA has a very strong sustainability program. I would say, they're well known if you look at their work. Unilever has put a lot of effort in. Unilever is a big company, but they've put a lot of effort in. Mars has put a lot of effort in as a big private company. So Unilever, I think, is public. IKEA is public. I think Patagonia, I think, is private. Mars is private. A lot of energy put into their sustainability program. Another one, the Unscented Company. This is a small company outside of Montreal. But again, they're embodying the good ethics of what we want to see. Check them out. They're a B Corp. They're really good. So those are the good. The bad. What are the bad? What do you think the bad ones are? What characteristics might they have? Greenwashers, yes. I would say the ones that are oblivious to this. Corruption, business as usual. So organizations that refuse to see the writing on the wall, that's one. Exploitatives, they stick to the traditional model. I would say rigid command structure, rigid management, stick to the traditional model of command and control. They're not flexible in fact fight change. Trump. The ones, well, I hate to say it, like I don't want to just be a part of the party and jump all over Trump, but if you look at these characteristics, which I think are universal, if you fail to see the writing on the wall, that's not a good trait. If you stick to the traditional model of command and control, that's not good right now. If you're inflexible and in fact, you fight change, that's not good. And if you have questionable ethics, those are all things that I know. If you line those up, that's just the way he's operating, and it's not good. I would say those aren't good characters. That's the bad. Okay. So if you look at, here's a link to some companies that are, the worst environmental offenders according to earth.com. Now, it just so happens that many of these are energy companies, coal and so forth. But, maybe they're right from an environmental standpoint, but we need to dig deeper because there are energy companies out there that have tremendous sustainability programs. So one is called the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, ADNOC, and they're doing tremendous things with their sustainability program. And yes, they're an energy company. So do they have a climate impact? For sure. But are they doing tremendous things from a sustainability standpoint? Yes, they are. So we have to, yes, if we look at the sectors, we have to dig into the reports to assess. And lastly, the ugly. What are the ugly? They are total disasters. Okay, these are companies that are not only not doing, so some of the bad are just okay. They're traditional command and control, maybe oblivious, who knows? But you know, they're not in line with the way things need to be going forward, and they're not in line with the sustainability ethos. I don't. It's hard to say whether they're actively working against them or just not doing them. Whereas the ugly are those that are actively disasters, actively destructive. 8, 7, 10, 10. I don't know what that is. They are the ones that are seeking almost to cause damage to the earth. They are not inclusive. They are not transparent. These are egocentric, not ecocentric. Sometimes they do stay in business, these companies. And some of them are state-run, so that's, you know, makes a difference. In many ways, these companies are hostile to the very ethics that are fundamental to being human. These are the ones that Joel Bakan was talking about back in 2000, late 90s and 2003. These are the pathological companies. These ones that they are solely in the game to make money often, and without any disregard for anything outside of that that's related to environment, social, and governance issues, and the ethics that we have already talked about. And in fact, I think the worst ones are the worst ones, this is my personal opinion, that take advantage of sickness, fear, to get ahead, yes. And the worst ones, the ones that really don't like, and I don't want to be I'm not a hate person, like, but are the ones that make claims that, you know, some people say they're woke, you know, that come and say, well, we're this, and then they just do the opposite. Those are the worst, in my opinion, because they're pathological. Like they're not only not walking the walk, they're doing the opposite of the walk. They're saying they're doing one thing and doing the complete opposite of that, and that's pretty bad. Okay. So one example I would say, I mean, now I haven't verified this, but it's been in the news a lot lately, is, and I'm not too familiar with this company, I didn't actually know about them too much beforehand, was this company called Anthropologie. Do you know this company? Yeah, no, so I'd never shopped there. I don't know their stuff. I think it's more, is it women's clothing or I'm not sure what exactly they sell, but and housewares and home goods. So kind of like I don't know what to compare them to, but whatever. I mean, that's their market. Now I don't. I mean, this was came out, so it's there's been a lot of accounts of this. So they came out with the Black Lives Matter being very kind of progressive in their marketing about, you know, putting equality first and so forth. And then it comes out in the news that they had actually some employees that were told to code people from different races when they entered their stores, and then keep their eyes on them. That's multiple accounts of that. And now, of course, they've come out and responded to that, but the accusations that have been leveled of that seem quite credible, former employees. And to me, that's just awful because, you know, you're coming out as being this like holier than thou organization, yet you're, you know, moving in completely the opposite direction. And that's not good at all. So that to me is the ugly, where you're like, oh my God. Okay, so, and there's other examples of that out in the world, and there's probably much muddier ones than that. So the way forward. So what do you think we want to see in sustainability reports going forward, considering we're in this new era? Some ideas then, I would say, that I will leave you with, and you will have some ideas about this yourself, is climate action. So climate action is going to be something that is in sustainability reports, and it's got to be more in sustainability reports, specifically mitigation and adaptation. How are organizations reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, and how are they adapting to change? Because we want them to be resilient as well as, you know, not contributing to the problem, right? So that's specifically important for companies and organizations that are vulnerable to these disruptions. Second thing, mainstreaming biodiversity and ecosystems. How are these companies indoctrinating biodiversity conservation and sustainable use of ecosystem services into what they are doing? Like, are they doing any environmental profit and loss account? Um, are they documenting and measuring their impact and reducing their impacts? Are they contributing to restoration of ecosystems and ecosystem services? Right? That's a thing I think we want to see in sustainability reporting forward. Do they have metrics to reflect these other social factors, such as transparency, inclusivity, and equity? Are they monitoring that? Not saying, like, posting on Instagram a black square. Like, that's fine, good for you, but show me how you're doing this. How are you, adapting to these? How are you being transparent? Are you publishing your sustainability report and auditing, having what you're doing audited? Um, and lastly, are you demonstrating metrics to reflect resilience as well? Wouldn't it be nice to know that leaders of these organizations are thinking about what might go wrong? I think that would be nice to know now, considering that I think we're in a highly disruptive era. So therefore, why don't we have metrics to reflect that, right? Reflect how we will, considering what might go wrong and how we will deal with that. I think that's a new era that we're going to start to see more and more of in sustainability reporting. And ultimately, the question then is, from an organizational standpoint, is resilience of what to what? So we as an organization are resilient to pandemics, to climate disruptions, to social uprising or whatever it might be by doing this, right? By investing in the communities, right, in which we're working. Reducing or we're becoming resilient to droughts because we're working with research institutes in the countries we're working to assess what risks we're exposed to, and we are investing in ecosystem services to assure that there is steady supply of water to the communities and that which we need to run our organization, right? We're resilient, and this is how we're doing it. All right, so that's the spiel. What are your thoughts? For those in 660, this is stuff to think about for your work and reports. For those that are in 560, I think it's important to think about the accounting side of this. How do we account for that? For those other folks in 322, this is kind of big picture stuff, but it relates to how we define sustainable development going forward. Is defining it in terms of not only our impacts on social, economic, and environmental or ecological systems, but the capability to be resilient to disruptions. Good. Okay. No questions. Hopefully I've left you with something that is of value and to think about. All right, so the takeaway of this will be to take a look at the groups that you deal with, who you work for, and the companies that you do business with, and who you shop from, and ask, I don't know, even ask them, are you resilient? What does that mean to you? And I think you'll get some people who may not be able to respond to that question. And that's what you want, because that will cause them to think about it. So thanks for coming out. Those in specific courses, email me if you have any questions. And I will see you in the discussions other than that. And anybody else, if you have questions, you know how to reach me by email. Have fun tonight, and I will see you online soon.